Policy Conference. My name is Ronnie Hammad. I work in the office of the Vice President for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. I work at the World Bank. This session is the culmination of a 2-week-long conference at MEI designed to elevate and advance the conversation on Lebanon in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Over the course of 9 panels and many keynotes, we heard from policymakers, diplomats, economists, development practitioners, and think tanks from across the world. Starting with politics, foreign policy, and economic reform last week, we transitioned to humanitarian and defense policy this week to provide a holistic assessment of the current crisis. Today, we're going to focus on the path forward for Lebanon. This event is being sponsored by LIFE, Lebanese International Finance Executives. Last year, in response to the unprecedented crisis, they created the LIFE Advocate Pillar, which aims to channel LIFE's considerable expertise and resources to try to influence policymaking in Lebanon and to support its economic, financial, and social development. So let's get started. I am delighted to be joined by Ferid Belhaj to engage in an in-depth conversation on Lebanon, on how to craft a path for Lebanon's sustainable and equitable growth as we move beyond the current crisis. Ferid is no stranger to Lebanon. He is currently the World Bank Vice President for the Middle East and North Africa. And from 2012 to 2017, he served as the World Bank Country Director for Lebanon based in Beirut. Ferid, thank you so much for joining us today. I understand you are in Beirut. Can you tell us what brings you back to Lebanon and what are your initial impressions?
Thank you very much, Ronnie. And thank you to LIFE, obviously, for the great job that you guys are doing. It's really reinvigorated in a way to see how many Lebanese from within Lebanon and from the diaspora are, holding extremely tight their engagement and their commitment to the country. It's really great and refreshing. And thanks also to the Middle East Institute and to all the colleagues and Paul, obviously, who is a good friend. Look, I am indeed in Beirut. It's great to be back, and it is also a bit sad to be back and in this kind of an environment and this kind of an atmosphere. I haven't been to Beirut for the last about 19 to 20 months because of the COVID crisis, etc. And I'm back, obviously, to resume our conversation with government, look at where we stand in terms of our program and dialogue with Lebanon, and also to get a better sense firsthand of the situation after a very tough year for all of Lebanon and each one of the great Lebanese people. See what was happening on the economic side, then on the financial and monetary side. The tensions, the so-called revolution that really brought people on the street and put pressure on government and decision makers. And then that terrible and dramatic blast of the port of Beirut, a blast that has no excuse. This is mere basic criminal negligence, and this is where we all of those who love Beirut, who love Lebanon, get angry at the what in Arabic we could call the la mubalat. Nobody gives a damn, and it is terrible because this country deserves way more than what it is getting from its political class. Generally, as World Bank officials, we are extremely cautious and diplomatic in getting the messages through. But let me suggest that when you get to a place where, having tried all sorts of rounded, diplomatic, light touch messages, and when you feel that nobody is listening, nobody's paying attention, nobody's interested, you need to toughen the tone, not necessarily because you feel that you may be heard better, but frankly, for oneself, so that we cannot say one day that we did not try it all. And, we have tried over the last few months to put our words and to put our thinking on a number of our publications, a number of our the issues that we worked on, whether it is Lebanon Economic Monitor or a number of interviews and social media events. And we say it as it is. We call a spade a spade. And we call a spade, that is, this is a state that is on the verge of becoming a failed state. This is a state and a government that is not taking care of its people, its citizens. This government is called a caretaker government. I don't see the take and I don't see the care. All I see is a process of non-decision making. And this is really terrible. And this is unfair. And we need to expect more from responsible decision makers. We at the bank, and let me focus just a bit on what we have been doing. Over the last very, very many years, we have tried to come and put, in a way, our money where our mouth is, but also try to do a lot of hand-holding, understanding where Lebanon is coming from. This is a country that for the last, let's say 10 years, without going before, 2010, 2011. Look, the civil war in Syria, hundreds of thousands, possibly 1 million and some of refugees flocking in almost one shot into a country that was already shaken socially, economically. These people were, in one way or the other, welcomed into Lebanon. They were taken care of, one way or the other. And the country was able and managed to keep itself together and to help these hundreds of thousands, possibly 1 million and some, Syrian refugees integrate one way or the other the Lebanese society with the full understanding that at some point they will need to go back. But in the meantime, they were taken care of. And unlike other countries, let's say Jordan, there was no camps. Those refugees basically melted into Lebanon. We thought when we said it, that Lebanon at the time delivered to the world a global public good. And the world did not respond at the level of that price that was paid by Lebanon. So basically, the world got that public good and made Lebanon pay for it. We tried our best as the bank, really to come to the rescue, and we arranged for Lebanon to become eligible for what we call IDA money, basically money that is normally going to the extreme poor, 0% interest rate, etc. But still, that was money that Lebanon had to repay, even though over very long maturity, etc. In a way, Lebanon was, as a number of my Lebanese friends used to tell me and still tell me, was borrowing for refugees. Now we can have a long discussion around that, but still Lebanon showed tremendous generosity. And that's why no one would think 1 second of letting go of the country. This is a great country, these are great people. When the crisis developed into an economic crisis, when the crisis developed into a crisis of, I would even say a municipality crisis. When I was there, that was this issue of the basic municipal services not being managed properly. Well, we, the bank, try to help. We try to help with a number of projects, injecting money into the Lebanese economy. We try to help on some projects that became possibly controversial, like, for instance, the terribly controversial idea of providing water to Lebanon. Controversial idea. Who would even think, about providing water to the greater Beirut at a time when in the 21st century, you need tanker trucks to bring water into Ashrafiyah and to other places during the summer. Who would think of something like that? But anyway, we tried. There was a big debate. Fine, we heard it. We stepped back. We also tried.
Sorry, you raise a lot of very good issues, and I wanted to, drill down a little bit on them. So, but why don't you finish your final thoughts?
A couple of more issues. When after the economic crisis, COVID-19, and obviously the blast in Beirut, and looking at numbers and looking at figures and data, we saw the poverty rate in this country climb in a dramatic way. This morning, I was with the Minister of Finance. He was telling me that his own latest data is indicating 55% of the Lebanese population today is under the poverty threshold. 55%. This is Lebanon. This is the 21st century. It's mind-boggling. So what we try to do is to put on the table quick money to help those poor citizens, get them direct cash, get them something to let them go by and possibly go through the crisis. And at the same time, give the government some breathing space so that it can possibly open the door to some kind of reforms that would allow this government to gain credibility with its own people and with the international community. So, giving a space for that government so that the pressure, the social pressure, is less, heavy on it. Unfortunately, as we speak right now, that was supposed to be a fast disbursing, cash transfer. It's still stuck somewhere. Hopefully, after the talks we had between yesterday and today, things will move through. We'll see. But it is really something that, both irritates me personally and poses a big question mark for all of us in the international community who would like to help. And I understand, and this is my last point, I understand that people can feel sorry that Lebanon, from a place that could be calling for development money and investment, would be today calling for food subsidy or food cash transfer for people to be able to eat and to go by. I understand that frustration, but you know what? That's where we are. So we would like to push that dimension right now, that social dimension right now, and at the same time, keep pushing and keep engaging and keep dialoguing on the medium and longer term reform agenda. So anyway, I've been long, but I just wanted to give you a sense of my frustration so that we can put that discussion at that level of frustration from me and possibly from all the participants around the big room here.
I think your expression of anger and frustration is shared by many, I think. I just want to, for all the participants around the world who are watching this through this conversation, please feel free to ask your questions through Zoom Q&A, which is featured at the bottom of your screens. If you're joining us on YouTube live stream, you can submit your questions by emailing events@mei.edu. So Ferid, just to kind of pick up on the point you make and talk about the extent of the crisis. I think it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around this. The World Bank issued a headline-making report this week that called Lebanon sinking to the top three. And in that analysis, it shows that the financial and economic crisis Lebanon is facing today is perhaps ranked in the worst loss of income of any country and globally since the mid-19th century. And as I understand it, it's basically based on two indicators. One is how we measure income, GDP per capita before the crisis and after, and how long a country is likely to take to recover from this crisis. So can you tell us a little bit about that report that just issued this week and what it means, for the current crisis?
We called it Lebanon sinking because the report immediately before it was called the deliberate depression. We wanted again to push that button, to raise that red flag, and saying that by continuing in these non-decision-making processes, by continuing in these terrible government ways of governing, in a way, Lebanon is now experiencing something that is almost unprecedented around the world, and surely, or in MENA anyway, we've never had this kind of event. The real GDP of Lebanon is projected to be contracting further by 9.5% in 2021. This is following 20.3% contraction this year and 6.7% in 2019. So we are really continuing to dig. And this is where the whole sinking type of concept is coming from, because we don't see today, in spite of everything, in spite of the tensions and the strife and the social situation and the economic fallout. Well, we don't see real commitment to try to redress the situation. And again, this is an alert on our side, on the bank side. Is it coming out of a surprise as a surprise? Obviously not. Is somebody this morning was telling me, oh, you have dropped the bomb. Well, you know what? It's not even a bomb. It's been there forever. We've been talking about it for years. For years, the IMF and us were talking about Lebanon defying gravity. The issue with gravity is that at some point it catches up with you. And now it is catching up with Lebanon. Hence the whole sinking, physically sinking. So what is to be done? Look, we all know what Lebanon needs. It needs a new system of governance, most and foremost, meaning a system by which laws and regulations are applied equally to everybody. And that's that's true for everything. When it comes to the monetary system, to the way you get access to businesses, or by the way you get basic services from the government, to government entities. That is important, because if there is one issue that is now posing problem in the whole of MENA, by the way, it is this distrust between government and the citizen. It is this social contract that we've been talking about for years that is flawed, even more flawed in Lebanon than maybe in other places. But we need to change that social contract. And it's not just words, because specifically you can do it. You can do it by bringing about a system by which there is no rent seekers, and by which there is in your economy is a level of contestability that would allow for anybody to get a chance to open a business and to compete fairly and squarely, which is, by the way, not the case today. So there is a need to do that. Now, is there a political will to do it? I don't see it. Let me give you an example and I'll stop here. Yesterday, I went to see, with the Minister of Health, I went to see the hospital in Baabda, and I saw how the whole vaccination process was going. You know that 3 months ago, I believe, we went to the board of directors of the World Bank, and we pushed the board to allow us to move ahead and to finance, for the first time in the world ever, to finance acquisition of vaccines. And it was Lebanon. Lebanon opened the door. Lebanon acted as a pilot. And we answered the question from the board of directors related to our trust in Lebanon being able to abide by all of those commitments that they have made. One of them, the most important of them, is equal distribution based on a very, very clear hierarchy of priorities. Well, I vouched for it. And I had a good discussion. And when we opened that campaign, I was at 3 a.m. in the morning in Washington, delivering a short address to the prime minister and to a number of ministers. And I put it very clearly, no wasta when it comes to vaccination in Lebanon. Well, it started okay for a few days. And then we heard a number of breaches. And we put our foot down. And what is more important than the bank, the Lebanese civil society raised hell because they saw what was going on, and they went after the government. And they went after us as well. They basically held us responsible. They said, you promised. And we had a very, very tough conversation with government and with all of the people, I'm not going to be naming who got those extra curricular vaccinations. We had a very tough talk with these people. And you know what? Things swung back into normalcy. Isn't there a lesson to be learned? That the conjunction of strong, vocal, responsible civil society and Lebanon's partners sticking together and engaging with the government, and frankly, on the other side, a government or a minister anyway, who heard that message and who basically brought the situation back to normal. I believe this is a good example of governance by pressure and by positive engagement from the whole polity, civil society, but also the partners of Lebanon. Why can't we enlarge that to other sectors and to other domains and try to see to what extent we can keep moving in this area of transparency, better governance, rule of law?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a hopeful sign, and in a very noisy and in an environment where there are a lot of very bad, unfortunately, stories about this. But I want to go back to this point that you're making about this deliberate depression, and to explain it to our viewers in a way that shows that it's not a question that there's a lack of political consensus on the economic reforms, but that there is a consensus, a political consensus in defense of bankrupt economic system. And to me, this is a really critical point about how a system that very benefits the few at the expense of everybody else. So I wondered if you could translate that into how we need to think about the biggest question, I think, facing Lebanon today, which is the deposits of people in the banks, and what is your thinking on how we need to kind of get out of and protect, say, the small deposit holder at the expense of people who probably benefited the most from these high interest rates that were being offered when world interest rates were being negative around the world.
Yeah, in I think it was in November, I believe, of 2016, talking about Lebanon Economic Monitor, this publication of ours. We had a publication, reports precisely on what we called at the time the financial engineering that was still going on, and that people now are calling a Ponzi scheme, but at the time, nobody was calling it that way because it was still working. And we had a discussion about it at AUB, and it was a heated conversation because we were making the point that this is not something that can continue forever. And again, quoting many of my predecessors, that Lebanon was still defying gravity, but that gravity will at some point hit. So now the problem is that gravity is hitting, but it is hitting the most those small depositors and those people who have put their little money into banks, and that now are finding themselves in a very, very fragile situation. What can be done? Frankly, I cannot give you one answer because there are tons of answers. And by the way, the Lebanese decision makers, politicians, everybody knows what is to be done, because somebody at some point will need to, incur some kind of losses. Somebody somewhere would need to, find a compromise so that the majority does not lose everything. And this is something that will have to do with, the politics of the country and how it is going to be moving. There is an IMF possible engagement. Hopefully, it will come through that, and the bank will be of course in that dialogue. There are many solutions that will be put on the table, but for that, one needs to engage with our friends from the IMF. I need to engage with them in a very constructive way, and frankly, get rid of this very odd idea that whether it is the IMF, the bank, or anybody else would come with abrupt solutions to be done kind of yesterday, and that's that. You know how this thing works. You move ahead, you agree on a plan, you agree on sequencing, you make sure that you are protecting those that are the most vulnerable, you make sure that social safety nets are very much in place, and you make sure that you are mitigating any adverse impact of the reform plan. This is not instant coffee, it will take some time, but you know what? It needs to start yesterday. And the thing is that it hasn't started yet. So what I would suggest is that, this government, caretaker or not caretaker, would need to, launch positive signals, vis-a-vis the international community, the donors, the IMF, the bank, etc., in terms of its willingness to at least start considering what I would call no regret reforms. Reforms that would need to be made anyway, today, tomorrow, or in 5 years. So let's start now, and we are already willing and hopefully able to have.
I have a few questions coming in on the chat, and I wanted to just raise them. Some of them you've kind of already addressed. Alex raises the point about how the bank and the IMF knew about this Ponzi scheme, knew about many of the issues that are being raised a few years ago. And why was in there? So he's asking why this wasn't raised more clearly and more forcefully when governments were spending our savings for salaries and cronies, right? And a kind of related question, which is what you kind of talked about in terms of importance of civil society, and using it as a way to hold government accountable. Is there you're talking about creating a new system, but I'm hoping that, do you have any thoughts about how you can support civil society and to stop, in this particular case, the question is around stopping the drain of subsidized commodities that are going to Syria, for example. So how can we support and encourage civil society to really be more, to be able to speak up, and maybe any thoughts about the elections next year?
Two very good questions. On the first one, it's not a question of whether we knew or not. There is a sense when things look too good that there is something that's not working in the right way. We alert, we dialogue, we raise issues, but you know what? The bank doesn't have an army. We cannot invade the country and impose our will, thank God. What we do is really bring advice and sit around the table and and raise, the issues and raise the concern and try to come up with alternative to the policies that are being pursued. And the bank can make a mistake. The IMF can make a mistake. Let's sit around the table, discuss it, go to the bottom of it, and understand each other. We have zero interest in bullying anybody, and zero interest in supplanting the government. That's not what we are here to do. What we are here to do is really to get the message through. We look at other experiences, other countries who may have gone through the same kind of process, how they got out of it, learn from them, and try to inspire some of our interlocutors, whether it is Lebanon or any other place. So it's not that we didn't talk. We spoke about it, as I was mentioning. We even published a lem on it. It was quite explicit. The issue is, if people don't listen to you, you have we don't have the means to impose our will. Now, in terms of civil society, I really believe very strongly that civil society has a very important role to play in any country, not as an alternative to government, but as a complement and as a sounding board and as an alert system. Very important, because governments get elected. Let's say parliaments get elected for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever. Then during those 4, 5, 6, 7 years, the accountability is quite minimal. They are there. So you need sounding boards. You need people to come and tell you, hey, you are not going in the right direction. But what you need to make sure of as well is to keep that balance. At the end of the day, government governs. Civil society alerts and possibly pushes, lobbies, so that you can always get into that always moving equilibrium that makes the polity of a country and that make any country work. So for us, for instance, we work in a number of countries with civil society. We engage with them in our consultations, basically in each one of our programs. Yesterday, for instance, we had a very good roundtable with a number of colleagues and friends from broad civil society in Lebanon. Very interesting, very constructive. People with great ideas, that they feel that they can channel through us, or ideas that we may channel through them, by the way. So there is that very positive and constructive dynamic happening with civil society, and our engagement with civil society is very important. And by the way, and I'll finish with this, in many of our project policies, consulting civil society is a must. So, particularly on issues that have to do with the environment, issues that have to do with the sustainability of our financing, we consult civil society and we try to make sure that it is as representative a civil society as it can be.
I'm wondering whether in these discussions you've had, either with government or civil society, that you managed to address the critical issue at the moment of the subsidies. As you know, central bank reserves are declining and rapidly, and it's going to happen. These subsidies for fuel, medications, and wheat and other commodities are costing the government $5.8 billion a year. Many of these subsidies are not targeted. Only 20% of the poor actually benefit. 80% go to kind of people who are and can afford it. So how is the bank trying to support the government in kind of have a soft landing around this issue of the subsidies? And what are we doing to kind of soften the impact on poor people through expected higher inflation?
As a matter of principle, you don't just take away subsidies overnight. You need to first have a very clear, detailed targeting system that would allow you to identify those who need those subsidies. And then, if you want to take them away, then you compensate subsidies by cash transfer. So you have the reality of the price in the market, but you also you give the capacity for those who deserve those subsidies to get cash in their hands. That has a couple of advantages. One, government will be dictating your consumption patterns through incentives that are basically the subsidies. That, frankly, would give also a lot of more voice to people. It's a democratic system. It's a system where people can choose what to consume and what not to consume. So it is important. The third point is that you don't just go from a system that has 100% subsidies to a system that has 0% subsidies, and you don't provide for those safety nets I was talking about. So this needs to be sequenced, and this needs to be thought through, and this needs to be extremely, and precisely managed. I don't know. I haven't looked at it very, very carefully, but from what I hear, none of the latter was actually put together. So, I would be cautious. While I am extremely in favor of getting away from subsidies, I'm also extremely in favor of doing it sequentially, doing it responsibly, and doing it making sure that those who need those subsidies get cash into their hands. And by the way, this is in part, one of the rationales of our social safety nets project, which, if the government continues in the way of getting rid of subsidies, would be even more relevant today than it was when it was thought through with the government and a few months ago.
So I want to shift a little bit the conversation beyond the immediate crisis. And I'm going to just kind of come up with an imaginary scenario just for a moment, and indulge me for this. So imagine we have an opportunity where you have a dream team of technocratic yet politically savvy experts who come together and are able to form a cabinet and are given the authority for at least a year to pass whatever reforms and whatever laws are needed to be able to actually get the country out of the crisis. So I have a two-part question. One is, what would the bank advise the government to do, and how would it support it? And maybe talk about the role that the bank plays in terms of mobilizing funding and resources from other places. So, and there's a question in the chat about whether said resources are still available, for example. And then the second, and a kind of related issue, is all this might sound really ideal, but the context and the background of it is that we still have weapons in the arms of different groups in Lebanon. In the chat, somebody's talking about Hezbollah, the Palestinians, Amal, and others. You have a parliament that's really not particularly fulfilling its role of accountability and oversight. And there's a lot of, black market economy going on. So I'm just trying to say that, we all know the situation, but if you had this dream team, what would the bank do to really try to craft a path out of the immediate crisis?
When the government of Mr. Saad Hariri was being put together, I think it was in 2016, I remember it was well, because I was still around, or maybe early 17, I can't remember. We put together a white paper that had basically a path for reforms. And that white paper had, it was kind of a two-pronged reforms that we need to do immediately, to address the fierce urgency of now, as somebody way more famous than me said once, and the medium and longer term. I believe that white paper is still very, very relevant, by the way. So advising, yes, we have on the table a number of policies that could be put together. Now, you are mentioning laws, and here too I have a strong view. In all of our countries in MENA, from Morocco to Iran and every country in between, When they have a problem, they adopt a law. The problem is that, you get this kind of layers upon layers of legislation, sometimes contradicting each other, sometimes not necessarily well put together, drafted in an awkward way. And in fact, bringing about more uncertainty than certainty. And you know what? When you have big fat laws with tons of covenants, each one of those has in its core, an authorization, a green light, a this and that, which at the end of the day becomes, a small niche for corruption. So let me suggest the following. If I were, let's say, forget about Lebanon. Let's say I am in a government in country X. Let's say my own country. And by the way, I made that suggestion in my own country. You have an audit of all the laws that have to do with the economy. You audit them all with one objective: to get rid of 90% of them. To allow for the private sector to thrive with a set of regulation that can be changed and modified as things move. Because you know what? A law, once it's there, it becomes a constraint, it becomes more difficult to manage, difficult to change. You have kind of framework laws that would give guidance, that would make the government, the state, play its real role as an enabler, not as a doer, and open the door to creativity, to these young people who have tons of new ideas, who are ready, willing, and able to create jobs and to create wealth and to create businesses. Allow them to move fast. Stop having them go through 10 authorizations and then the number 11 come when they have those 10 authorizations already in the pocket, and actually putting them in a situation where they're already non-competitive before they even started. Because today competition is not within the government, within the country. The market is elsewhere. You need to be competitive vis-a-vis your international markets. And this is where our countries, unfortunately, Lebanon is not an exception, are extremely heavy in rules and laws. And so we need to get rid of that. And once we have that, then you would see that you would have given that oxygen to the economy that would allow us to start breathing better. I'll give you a quick example and then we'll go to the next discussion.
Yeah, that would be interesting. An example would be helpful.
So one example, Algeria. Algeria is the quintessential socialist country. They have socialism in their DNA. I had a discussion not very long ago with a group of startup young people. Absolutely amazing creativity and frankly, venturing into markets that I would have never suspected. They told me what they were doing, etc. And at the end, I told them, look, what can the bank do to help? One thing, get the government off of our back. That was it. And you know what? I had a meeting immediately after that with the Minister of Finance, and I delivered the message exactly as it was. The thing is that government is there to be, again, the enabler, to help things happen and not to stop them. When I was here in Lebanon, and I'll stop with this, in order to get a paper, go from a service or whatever in the administration to the minister and back. One day, because of one project, I had to go myself, physically, have the minister sign it, take it from the minister, take it to the other guy, sign it as well, went to the other floor and have it signed again. So I told the minister, I'm not going to get out of this building without this paper being duly signed so that we can start moving ahead with our project. And this is, imagine, this is the World Bank. It was, I think it was even a grant from the World Bank, and it was all benefit, So imagine your lambda citizen trying to engage in opening a business or in asking for a quote authorization. It is le parcours du combattant. It is really, really tough. So this is something that we would advise every government to do: get rid of legislation that are too heavy, have the government play its role as an enabler, give people the capacity to engage, to be creative, to be able to go ahead with their businesses, to be able, by the way, to fail. So you need to have a legal framework on bankruptcy that would be a positive one, that would allow people to be able to fail and restart, and try to be at par, my God, with our competitors in the other part of this, very small world in which we are living.
Yeah. No, I think this idea of how to create framework laws that are really flexible and adaptable as issues and situations arise is a really, I think, much needed in this region. And I think the private sector, as you well articulated, is the key really for us to come up with it. But a related issue, I think, is there's a bank initiative, World Bank initiative called Stolen Asset Recovery. And I'm wondering what the bank can do, and maybe other donors can do, to really look into, and you talk about audits, about auditing some of the people who maybe have been money either taken out of the country or how much of the stolen assets and these public resources can be recovered to really help in the, to compensate for the actual, funds that are now much needed to help develop the country.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There was the STAR initiative started in 2007, I believe. It was launched by Bob Zoellick at the time when he was the president of the World Bank, and it had some successes. For that, you would need the government to ask. So it worked in a number of places where there was a succession in government. There were either, revolutions, etc. So the successful government came and asked for it. Now, look, this is something that one can look at if there is a request and if there is a need for it. But this is coming from the World Bank. But there are also, initiatives that should be homegrown, within the system. If you have the judiciary that is strong enough, independent enough, and competent enough, you should also be in a position to go after all of those who have kind of abused the system. And this is where, going back to one of my points earlier, the rule of law, absolutely fundamental. If we want to have the state regain the trust of its citizen.
So there are a number of questions in the chat really addressing this issue of accountability. So if the bank, does come back with a recovery program, with an IMF program, there is a path out. How can we ensure the funds are going to be used in an effective, transparent way? What are the mechanisms that the bank and the fund have to ensure these levels of accountability? Parliament playing its role. So there's a lot of questions on the chat around this. I wonder if you could just, touch on those, please.
Yeah, no, obviously good and legitimate questions. When it comes to the bank, our projects are audited, I would even say ad nauseum. So we really, really make sure that every dollar goes where it should be. This is when it comes to what we call investment projects. Now, we can get into details. We have procurement systems, we have auditors looking at everything, and I'm sure that here or there you'd find a glitch or an exception, but 99% of the money, 99.9% of the money goes to where it should be going. You have also the budget support operations, and those are basically cash going directly into the budget for the bank or into the central bank when it comes to the IMF. There, what we look at is the review of the public spending. We look at the budget and we look at what that money went against in terms of its use. There too, and this is where we want to have, when we go ahead in budget support, when the IMF moves ahead with its own programs, we have, as part of our quote conditionality, to be able to audit the budget and to audit the accounts and make sure that everything is going the way it should be. Now, when it comes to budget support, money is fungible, so the government has that flexibility. But we condition it upstream with a number of measures that allow actually for that money to become really an investment for the government, so that we don't get into a place where the government is getting higher debt with zero return on that investment. So rest assured that we really are looking very, very much at every cent that is spent when it comes to our spending money for our investments. And our documents are public documents, and whether it is the project document or the documents that are there to monitor the execution of the project. So the scrutiny of people is not only allowed, but it is encouraged. So if someone finds a discrepancy, please come in and alert us. We have a number of systems, including the inspection panel and INT, the Integrity Vice Presidency. So we make sure that there is no odd use of bank money.
There's a range of options, I think, for a lot of civil society to seek redress for perceived bank not following its own rules. And I think we can have a long discussion about that. I want to combine a couple of questions, one from the chat and one just kind of a quick view. I mean, I know we're in the midst of the crisis, and I just want to think through like a vision, 20, 30 years from now. Where do you see potential sources of growth? What are the opportunities? What are the industries? What are the services that you think Lebanon can kind of begin to think about as a way to try to move towards those things? And, in the bank, we have a new policy called GRID, green, resilient, and inclusive growth. And I'm wondering if you could think about that framework as we build back better in Lebanon, how we can move towards, much more sustainable, much more renewable energy, much more environmental protection, greening of procurement, the whole range of elements that might seem like a luxury, but really are key for, putting it on the sustainable and equitable path over time. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts and a vision about how you would go about it.
When if you look at Lebanon's assets today, in the middle of the crisis and everything else, of course you have the human capital, absolutely and tremendously important, even though unfortunately a number of my friends are leaving the country because of what's happening. But still, the human capital is very much there. And just by way of looking at the history, when the country after the war restarted its reconstruction with President Hariri, Prime Minister Hariri, there was a huge number of Lebanese who came back. Because at the end of the day, you go away, but when things start building back, you come back and you help. So in that sense, I believe that human capital is an asset and it will not go away. You have also other assets, natural assets. When I look at at the public domain, it is incredible in Lebanon. The whole coastal areas, mountains, etc. You have tons of public domains in Lebanon. And a large swath of that is not at all exploited. One would think that having a very courageous, forward-looking, bold plan to take advantage of that public domain would be part of the recovery. You are talking about 2020, 2030, 2040. Yes, 10, 20 years down the road. Actually, one idea, crazy, I had, talking to some friends, but clearly, difficult to manage. But anyway, after all, I'm here to have crazy ideas. When the blast happened on August the 4th, we started talking, and as you know, the bank went ahead with the rapid damage and needs assessment and an evaluation of the cost of reconstruction. I was talking to some people and I said, look, I know Beirut and I love Beirut and I think it's a fantastic place. Why do you need to have that prime property front, ocean front, for the dirty, inefficient, dangerous port? When you have a port in Tripoli that can be enlarged, that could serve to, be the hub to reconstruct Syria. When you have down south in Sur, you have, another port that you can enlarge, and take that whole coastline all the way to the north and make of it an amazing, a center for services, hotels, banks, you name it, the Dubai of the Mediterranean. It could be amazingly powerful. Of course, immediately people started telling me that, the north this, the south this, and you get into all of those very odd dynamics within Lebanon. But you know what? Look at Lebanon through all of these divisions, north, south, east, west. Look at the assets, what you can make of it, the number of jobs you can create, the number of investment you can attract for that. Look, tomorrow, a Beirut that looks like that would be way more attractive than Abu Dhabi and Dubai combined. Because you have everything, if you have the right connectivity, if you have water being there in a way that would allow people to use it around the year, if you have electricity that comes, and if you have the infrastructure that allows you can attract everybody. You can make of Beirut, the lighting rod of the Mediterranean, the way it was. In my office in Washington, I have a picture of Beirut in 1952 or 54 or something. Amazing, beautiful. And when I look at similar capitals in MENA in 1950 something, they look like small villages. So the Beirut that we all love is that Beirut, the Beirut of services being provided and immense potential for growth. That's the Lebanon of 2030, 2040. Because it is 2030, 2040, we need to start managing it now.
Today. Farid, unfortunately, our time has come to a close, and I really want to take this opportunity to thank you for your passion, your commitment to Lebanon, and to really the World Bank support for really trying to address the human and social needs of the country. And I hope we can continue fighting for the people of Lebanon. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the participants, and particularly those who submitted questions to the chat. I know we didn't manage to get to all of them, but I want to thank you for your participation. The Middle East Institute will be publishing a booklet that will be summarizing the key takeaways of this, so be on the lookout for that. I want to and do check their website regularly, mei.edu, for any future programs and announcements. I wish you a good